All right, so hey guys, I had chatted a little bit on my page about doing a tutorial-ish kind of exercise on how I do what I do. And this is, to be honest with you, the second take at it because I realized I was rambling like a drunken fool the first time. So anyways, I don't think I have any crazy secrets about my workflow, but I use Lightroom and Photoshop like it seems like everybody does. And I figured I'd walk you through one. And instead of grabbing a 5D high-res photo, this is 100 ISO with a fancy piece of glass in front of a nice body, I wanted to do something that I think literally anybody could do for incredibly cheap. So actually, the other day we were filming an episode of my show. It's a YouTube show, which I'll drop the name for at another time because I don't want to make a fucking infomercial for myself. But we had multiple cameras set up. I don't know if they're in any of these shots. Anyway, this is what we did. We did a dumb thing to a dumb car. But we only had, not only, we have a bunch of cameras. We have a Canon 5D, two T4Is, and a Canon T1 as the backup. But the 5D is currently out of commission due to a card door issue. The one T4I was on one spot, the other T4I was on another spot, and we only had enough cards to do that, basically, only cards that would do video with those two cards. We had another 16 gigabyte card, but it was a super slow write speed, and it couldn't take anything above like a 480p video, which was just basically useless, and we didn't really need a third angle anyways. So I grabbed the T1, not even T1i, just a T1, and shot these photos of my roommate Blake and the co-host cutting up a car and doing all this crazy stuff. So I haven't really looked or edited any of these yet. I did some different ones the last time around. I did this one, which I've done, and that's, to be honest, it's a little bit of a crunchy edit. I find if I'm not intending on sharing a picture, I'll kind of go overboard with the edit just to see what I can do. But that said, we'll try to do something a little bit cooler here. So first things first, I've already deleted a bunch of the bad photos. So we'll just pick one. I like the context of that one, but it's not quite sharp where it should be. The camera focused back here, it looks like it focused around that area, which is fine. I mean, I'm shooting at f3.5, so it gets the job done, but I don't like it. So let's grab, I got a lot of sparks, a lot of directional stuff in this one, even flying up there. Let's grab this one. So we'll bring it over to the develop window. Now, I tend to bounce wildly back and forth between Lightroom and Photoshop. I've tried to get it down to more of a science. So I'll break it down here. The first step I always do is apply lens corrections, just because I like to be in a little bit more control of the fisheye or pinhole. We'll pinhole that one a little bit, makes them look a little bit thinner, fat fuck. But get rid of the vignette at least. It's not crazy with this little kit lens, at 400 ISO. And I'm at 4.5 even. I think that was the maximum aperture of the kit lens at 32 millimeters. But, really this kit I used camera-wise, you can probably pick up on Craigslist for $100 these days, tops. I mean, it's the factory lens, 6 or 7 year old camera. I'm not sure how old the thing really is. And the cheapest memory card Walmart had, So there's no banking secrets of how you get shots like this. So anyways, the first thing I'll do is I'll start to mess with white balance. And the white balance is kind of screwy because underneath this green tint. So usually, I know his hat's white, so I could put an eyedropper on it and go, perfect white balance. But that's not true because we've got green light coming in here, yellow, red light coming off the sparks. Everything's reflecting. There's no real white. His hat is dirty as all hell. It's just not accurate. So, if we tried to do an auto thing, that's okay. It's really blue. I'll try to pump in a little bit of warmth there, kind of where we can. I think that's about good. It's a lot of guesswork. Really, it's just you're taking pictures. Like I don't see the secret in anything I do here. So sorry if I'm a little bit more candid in my dialect here, but I just play with stuff. We slide things back and forth. I always crank the exposure all the way to the bottom and all the way up. So when you crank it up, you can see how much noise you have in your shadows and whatnot, and you crank it down and see how much detail you have in the highlights. Clearly, these white streaks are just burnt, right? I couldn't darken those no matter how hard I tried. Yeah, see, you can't get rid of that. That's kind of cool. It looks like a Nine Inch Nails album cover or something, but not quite the effect we're going for here. So we'll zero things back out again. I tend to just work in the order they come down. I just gestured at the computer screen with my hand. I don't know why you cannot see that. So I'll bump up the exposure a tiny little bit. Get that contrast a little bit on the high side. I like to crank the contrast up a little bit too much because you then still have full control over it by playing with these sliders and with the tone curve later, which I'll show you my method of a tone curve. So this is interesting. If you dive it down, you get that HDR look, and there's still some whiteness in those sparks, but I want them to be really bright. So let's get them right up there. Shadows cranked up. There's not too much noise. I'm shooting at 400 ISO, which is kind of the max of the camera, if you ask me. We'll crank them up a little bit. So now we've just kind of expanded the range. You can see the shadows better. You can see the highlights better. Now here's the secret. When I do the whites, I always hit down the Option key. And you can see it completely blacks out your photograph. And all you're seeing with white is white. So those are entire white points where there's no other data. It is just white. So let's crank it down until that sky is just kind of speckling in, right there between our little girder thing and the tent. And then we'll do the same thing with the blacks. Get rid of all the detail up there. It's a little too dark, so we'll bring it up a little bit more. But that's something we're going to fix with the curves later. It's kind of an interesting way to do it. Now, clarity is interesting. It can be amazing. It can be terrible. Since you can't see his face, it's not the worst because clarity looks just shit on people most of the time, I find. But I've actually found a more fun way to do clarity later on. So we'll actually leave that there. Vibrance and saturation. I tend to, if I crank the vibrance, I drop the saturation, and other way is true too. So if I crank the saturation, I'll dip the vibrance. So let's dip the vibrance in this situation, and then I just beef up that saturation a little bit, just so I have a little bit more to work with in the HSL. Close it down because, again, I get all paranoid if I have everything open, and I easily feel overwhelmed. I don't like the tone curve inside Lightroom. I love tone curve editing. I think this is some of the most powerful stuff you can do, but for some reason, the Lightroom one just feels like the turd in the punch bowl of Lightroom, and I would just much rather bounce it over to Photoshop. So here in the HSL, all you're doing is dealing with individual channels of light. The hue of them, you can bump them to either side. Saturation and the luminance of them, hence the clever name of HSL. But I really just take it as it comes. I slide stuff back and forth and find where I like. So the reds are pretty accurate. The oranges in this image, we can crank them up to the yellow. They get almost green. That's kind of cool. So let's bump them up a little bit. Yellows, there's not much. Looks like it's mainly in his hat, the little lame logo he designed. But that said, that logo is neon green, so let's bump that up a little bit to get it to that green point. Here in the green itself, though, actually, I'm only looking at his hat here with these greens. I tend to kind of have my eye wander around the photo until I see the most dramatic thing that the slider does, and then work with that. So let's bring it down a little bit. Aquas, yeah, I thought this would be pretty dramatic. That tent. Well, the tent's actually just a tarp, and it's funny, the tent looked like that in person, but most people think a tarp of that color, so I'm actually going to push it more to the blue, because I like the contrast of the red and the blue versus red and weird, not Christmas, teal green. So we'll leave the blue channel blue. Purple channel, what do we have much in purple? Looks like not too much. I'm seeing some diffusion kind of around that mark there, but nothing crazy. Oh, it looks like, okay, it's doing, the more you look, the more you see. If you look at that tire back there, it goes purple, it goes blue. We'll bump it a little bit more to the blue side so that we have all the hot red in here. And the magenta, again, I'm not seeing too much. And if I can't see it, I tend to just zero it out because eventually you will find a spot it did and it'll make a really weird effect. Saturation-wise, obviously there's plenty of red in here. I didn't even notice there was red in his hat apparently coming up there. That said, I don't want the red to overbear the sparks too much, so we'll actually bring down the red a little bit. So it's still there. You can still very clearly tell that we're destroying something red and metal. Orange is all those sparks. So let's let them come through a little bit. A little bit more than the red, but not quite to full power. Yellows, like I said, we tinted them green before, which I'm actually going to go back and undo now. Bring it down a little bit. Excuse me. And anyways, oh, look at Blake just texted me asking if I have any money for him. No, I'm busy trying to earn money with YouTube stuff. Anyways, so greens, I'm not seeing much. Looks like it's a bit of a burning thing going on over there. We'll just zero that out. Aquas, yeah, we can see that now. So actually, I'm going to bring down the aquas. Oh, no. It's funny. I say I'm bringing them down, but I'm not looking at the slider when I'm working. I'm looking at the image. So I'm actually bringing them up a fair chunk. Blues, pretty dramatic, so we will leave them kind of near center. Again, wasn't even looking, it's almost dead center. Purple channel is doing that outside stuff. I actually like that with a bit of saturation on it. It looks weird and black. It looks like the world's black and white and we're in a colored tent, which is a cool effect, but not for me right now. And you can see there's the other kind of magenta stuff we pushed a little bit red. So again, we'll bring that down. Keep all the color in here. Like I said, your eye is instantly drawn to what the hell's going on here. Now, I wish to say that, I picked my shutter speed in such a way to get this exact dispersion of sparks, but really it was the longest thing I could get sharp handheld, which is a 50th of a second at 32 millimeter on a crop censored camera with not very good IS, to be honest with you. And he was moving, so I wanted him to be sharp, and I wanted these sparks to get some movement, because that disc is sliding down, he's cutting through stuff. He's probably swearing at me. I didn't want to get him blurry. I wanted just all the movement in here. So I think a 50th of a second was pretty much spot on for what I was trying to accomplish, so good for me. Luminance is where you start to get some dramatic stuff. This is where we can really kind of make lights that weren't there. You can see you can just ruin the sparks. I'm actually going to brighten them up a little bit. Again, the exposure is kind of getting monkeyed with a lot, as you can tell. But the tone curve I do afterwards is what I try to fine tweak it with at the end. I'm just trying to get the relationship between colors where I want it right now. So if that means everything gets pushed a little bit bright, so be it. So now we push that background way brighter. So if I turn off this effect, this is what we did. So it brings down the saturation in some spots. You can see we cranked it up in other spots. It just kind of changed the overall lighting and tone of the photo. Split tone is something I used to be in love with, and all these other things, the effects of the vignette you can get in Lightroom are perfectly good and perfectly usable, but this is exactly where I stop. I go over to the photo, and I edit it in Photoshop. So I already have Photoshop open. It'll just render itself for a second, do whatever computer magic it does. I'll take a drink. It'll bounce this over. That's Facebook. And it'll do its thing. Bam, here we are. So first thing I always do is hit Command J on the layer I've got open, duplicate it. That way, anything I mess up, I didn't really mess up because I'm working on a second one. So first thing I'll do nowadays, it used to be that I would make a tone curve or I would, do some retouching. I don't want to retouch anything on this photo. Yeah, that roof's ugly, but I mean, this is supposed to be a raw kind of picture. So I don't need to get rid of that spark or go all crazy and clean his hat or do dumb stuff like that. So I'm going to go to filter. Where is it? I'm going to go to, where is it? It's camera raw filter. Now here is basically Lightroom inside Photoshop. As you can see, we have all the same stuff we had before. We don't have the HSL or some of the fancier things, but clarity's back. So what I'll do is now I'll grab a layer with just dimed clarity, render it to that, and now we have cranked clarity, no clarity. And you can just mess with blend modes, see if you can find something cool. Lighten tends to work in an interesting way because it really just clarifies your shadows in an interesting way. So let's use lighten there, and let's just crank the opacity until we have it somewhere we like. So about 50% clarity in just the shadows. There might be a way to do that in Lightroom in an interesting way, but I just haven't found it yet. Also, I would usually have cropped this image before because I don't like the red here. I don't mind the black, but I don't like these specks of red. But I'm just going to keep editing it in Photoshop and kind of crop right before I do a vignette, because the vignette's the only thing I want to be centered to most of this. Another thing I should mention is I'm working on a big old iMac, and I also have a trackpad and a mouse, so I bounce back between the two all the time. More precision adjustments, depending on if it's a brush or something, I go between the mouse and the trackpad basically all the time. Now we've got that on there, so let's make another duplicate so I'm not destroying stuff again. This time, actually no, that was wrong to do. We will grab, we'll do a new, this is where I get confused with what I'm doing. We'll just work with what we've got here. So let's open up a curve, because the curve is one of the most powerful things we can do. I always start in the middle, and I just drag it around and see what we can do. You're just kind of bumping up the overall exposure. So I'm going to crank it up a little bit there. And then instead of doing this and bouncing around, you see that makes an S curve. This is the shadows of your image, this is the highlights. So if I start to mess with the highlights, it's automatically messing with the shadows at the same time. Let's get rid of that point. I'll put a point right where the shadows are and right where the highlights are. That way I can work on the highlights and the shadows stay the same. So let's get this kind of in an interesting spot. I like to bring it down a little bit here on this one to kind of get that almost HDR effect that I sometimes hate. Shadows, let's let them be pumped up a little bit there. You can see we kind of did do what it would have done naturally. I just am crazy, control freak level. Now, I like to bring up the black point and get that, you get that Instagram effect, that weird fade, which can look really cool, but I find I want to be really accurate with it. So I click it, and then I use the arrows on my keyboard. You can see if I hold it, it cranks up. That way I can have it right down to the point of where I want it. So let's bring it to, about there. I like the no true black. I don't know, I'll keep it about there, actually. Sort of look. And then I'll make another point just above it. and kind of fine tweaks. So then you get that dark vibe to it where you'd swear that's black, but it's just not. It's tricking your eyes a bit. So you can see it's not too dramatic of a curve. There's on and off. It brings up that shadow. It almost makes it look sharper, but it's just not. I just like the effect. But if I did it a little too extreme, which I've been known to do, I will go back and mess around with the opacity. If I tend to do, a million curves, I'll go back, turn them all off, and then mess the opacity up with each of them, to make sure not one of them is doing something stupid. And then just for giggles, I always throw a second curves on there and hit auto and see what it would tell me to do. So it's saying just to bump up a little bit more, turn it on and off. And sometimes I'll keep it, sometimes I won't. I like that. I like that little bit of brightness it did. So why not let it have its due? Now, this is kind of a fun one I've been doing lately, is a gradient map. It doesn't always work, but it's worth a shot here. Okay, before we turn it on here, let's look at the photo. So right now our shadows are black, our highlights are yellow, essentially is how it goes. And if we had to pick a color for the shadows, I'd say they're maybe a little bit blue. And blue to yellow is a, very popular spectrum to go against. So let's try that for a second. Let's try to make these shadows a deep dark blue. Maybe not a fully saturated dark blue. Something a little bit on the gray side. Let's go maybe around there. But I want to keep the highlights actually white. So we'll make another post in the middle here. Post, maybe it's called. I don't know what it's actually called, but a spot. And we'll get the yellow in there. There, maybe get a little more orange in there. There we go. And now we'll just move stuff around. So we've got blue where we want blue, white where we want white, and orange where we want orange. So you can see we're just kind of building this second image. It's like a weird black and white, but with blue and yellow on top of everything. I will duplicate that. So I have two gradient maps. I'll add one as lighten and one as darken. So it's basically doing what one did before, but now I can adjust just the highlights or just the shadows. So let's turn off the lighten one. So now we have, you can see it's doing just the darken stuff. Just the highlights are being affected. And let's crank it way down. And I just like to fade it in. Maybe try around 30 for now. Then we'll bring up the other one. Crank it right down. Bring it up a bit. There we go. Now right now I'm looking at it like I like it, but as soon as I turn them off, I bet I'm going to go, no, it's terrible. Well, yeah, it's a little extra. I always tend to be a little bit extreme with them, so I'll kind of back them off another 10% based off what I initially think, and that usually ends up being pretty right. You can see it's really subtle, but that plus the curves does that, the Instagram effect, that moody sort of vibe. One second, let me take a drink here. Well, that's one of the side effects of not shutting up as your throat gets kind of dry. Who knew that would happen? Now, I want to do a crop on this, like I said before, and I want to do a vignette too. So let's crop first. And now I'm not going to delete the crop pixels, just in case I don't like what I'm doing. And let's see if we can just lock it into the original ratio. And I'm just looking at the bottom line right now. Go up until I see the last of that white dot's gone. Now I kind of look at my thirds. I don't follow the rules exactly every time, but in this case, I think I will a bit more. So let it be kind of around there. Yeah, we're losing a bit of spark, but we're trying to keep that. I think that's a seatbelt or a headliner or something in there. So hit enter, see what happens. I'm not crazy about this blackening. It's a little bit distracting, so we'll go back to the crop. This is why we didn't delete crop pixels. I could pull more of it if I wanted. See what happens if we go down to there. We're starting to push him to the center of that frame a little bit more than I'd like, but really you're drawn into that right away, and this creates a leading line in a way that I like. So let's do with that for a second. Now here's another control freak part of me that talks about vignettes. So I like to make a custom vignette. I make a selection in that new layer I made, hit Command-Shift-I, it inverts it, edit, fill with black. Now, obviously that is technically, I hit Command-D to undo my selection. That is a vignette. It's a little bit, rough, but technically it is one, but let's lock in the height and width and make it a little bit bigger. Maybe around, I might have got it right. Let's try 105. I want these edges to kind of kiss. So let's try one. That's about good. See, I'm not perfectly centered, so maybe we'll move it over a little bit. But you're gonna see why it's not the most important in a second. There we go. That's about right. Now I will go and grab a filter, Gaussian. I don't know how you pronounce this, but you use that one. That's what I do. And I'll find a blur I like, where it just creates a real vignette effect. Let's go around there. Still, it's way too dramatic, as you can see, but we can still mess with the opacity of it. But I'm actually going to duplicate it, take the first one, and turn it to, which one is it? Screen. No, I can never remember which one I do. Overlay? Overlay. See, now it's not affecting any highlights in any way, shape, or form. Those bright parts are staying bright, and it makes them really dramatic. I don't like that, but I like having it. So I'll find an amount of that effect that I like, maybe around there, and then I'll bring in the regular hardcore vignette, blend that in on top of it, and now you've got this interesting kind of dual level of it where you can see those highlights are darker than they are there, but not as dark as they'd be, if we just did the regular vignette. So let's place all those files, take a quick look back at it. I like it. I find this a little bit distracting, so now maybe we'll do, try to turn everything back on. Let's grab another one. Now I just start to mess with stuff. We'll grab a brush, crank the opacity way down. Let's do like 20%. This is black. It's a fairly big brush with no hardness at all. So essentially this is how you could paint a vignette if you wanted to. And I'll just start darkening this. One click is one brush stroke. Kind of pick what I want. And let's, that one was too much. Command Z undoes that. Maybe we'll kind of darken up here. Just any spots I find a little bit distracting. I think that's a bit distracting, so I'm going to do one quick click on it, but I like it so much I don't want to get rid of it. And, that hood can be a little bit, the roof can be a little bit much. And no one really knows that this isn't a vignette. That's the thing. It appears, you're faking shadows. You're photoshopping, right? So every click I'm doing is 20% opacity. So, math tells you what that's, 5 clicks is 100%. So you can see I'm just kind of single clicking areas I don't like. And now I still have the nice ability to totally turn off this layer as is or find the opacity somewhere I like. So let's find a little kind of mid ground at 77%. That's solid. So when I hit X, save changes, it bounces it back over to Photoshop. So let's go, into Lightroom. So give it a second to do its thing. I'm watching hard drive lights flash and computers give me, terrible sounds. And there we are. So now that we're back in Photoshop, in Lightroom, I keep doing that, we can make some more adjustments. So I'll go back to basics here, and I'll just try one last go for broke exercise. So I'm going to pump up the highlights a little bit more, get the shadows kind of where we like. Looks like I'm overall brightening up this image. Getting the whites where I want. Yeah, looks like I pretty much had it. And the blacks. Now, the blacks I'm not going to affect because I've spent so long getting those blacks just right. Oh, actually, I might crank them up a little bit. I like the look of that. There we go. All of a sudden, we have this before, not all the way before. This is right before those last minute adjustments and after. You can see I just brightened it up a little bit more. Kind of adjust for what your eyes do. So if we go to the full-on before and after, let's go back to the original image, reset everything. And now let's go back to library, do the XY view. You can see there is the final edit of a $100 camera setup, a Canon Rebel T1 with a kit lens with the probably more expensive than the lens protector on it. Your typical, everybody's stepmom has one of these when she thought she was going to be a photographer, but now she sells Etsy. We all have that somewhere in a closet in our family homes. Compared to that, you can see the crop made him bigger, made the sparks more dramatic. We got a little bit more of a shine up there. Overall, this is a photo I wouldn't mind posting with a watermark on it. Oh, and I should show you that. So what I do with a watermark is I will take the photo back to Photoshop now, because I like editing in Photoshop, the watermarks, a little bit more control of what you're doing. This is why I fill hard drives fast with a lot of files that are the same file. So now let's grab my Finder. As you can see, not everything in my life is as organized as my Lightroom is, but let's go to Radar Photography. Kirsty has my water. Where are my watermarks? Did I delete my watermarks out of this Dropbox? I may have, because I have multiple computers I work with at work and whatnot. Anyways, what I do, let's just show you here, is I'll grab the watermark file, which I'll pull up at a later date, and I'll drag it in. So right now we'll just put Weewa, because that's my watermark today. So let's pretend we had a white Weewa mark. So let's say you brought that in as a PNG or whatever, convert to a smart object. So bam, that's what you'd get if you just dropped in a watermark. So I'd get it kind of where I want. Let's do it around there. Find a size I like. I actually kind of like it where it's at. And now if I had a white one, but that whole corner was white, and I was like, oh crap, you can't see white on white, I'd go to blending options, I'd go to color overlay, and I'd pick a new color for it. In this case, I might use the eyedropper and grab, you know, that little bit of that yellow or the red in there. You can see it's not, turns out it's not as dramatic as I thought it was. There we go, a little bit of the yellow, I like that. So there we did do a little bit of a tint on it. I just eyeball it into a corner where I want with, right now I'm using the arrow key so I don't have to drag it. Hit another button just to get rid of that selection, and there we go. That's how I would share that that photo, watermarked Weewa. I would just export it from here and be done with it. So that is how I edit a photo. I don't know how long that was. I have no running clock, but if you want to see any more of this, or if this is something that isn't annoying to watch, or if anybody's even made it to the goddamn end, let me know. Drop a like. Tell me I'm a loser. Whatever you want to do. But yeah, maybe I'll start a YouTube with this. Maybe I won't. Just I hate people that are secretive about their processes. So this is exactly how I do what I do. If you have any questions, shoot me a message, and I'd be more than glad to help you out and get your photography to a level that you're happy with. I still think there's so much for me to learn. I'm looking at Frono's photos and B&H and Flern every day, trying to learn more stuff, and I'm constantly buying more gear because I'm, you know, just love digging myself into debt. But yeah, now I'm rambling like an idiot. So there you go. That's episode 1 of How to Be Like Rick, which no one should ever do. Thanks.